Parents who have disowned or genuinely stopped loving your child, what happened? Before we start with the first story, please hit the subscribe and ring the notification bell to stay updated with us. Number 15. My siblings and I have stopped interacting with my oldest brother. We found out that years earlier he had molested at least 2 boys. He was an adult at the time. He showed no remorse and turned the story around to say that those boys were at fault. It was so disgusting to watch someone you grew up with treat people so poorly and show such a blatant disregard for others. The good news is that the remaining 4 siblings have become closer, and we now are able to appreciate the good we see in each other. It's true when they say that if you could pick your family, it would look much different than it is. Number 14. My biological father divorced my mom and also his 3 kids, basically bouncing out of our lives and making it clear he wanted next to nothing to do with any of us when he left. Man, years later, at my older sister's funeral, that he had the fucking gall to attend, I asked him why he did that. He said, "I thought it would be easier for everyone." He actually meant it was easier for him to run home to his wealthy family and enjoy his second adolescence, while my single mother worked 2 jobs to feed 3 kids under 10 with 0 child support from him. Number 13. I disowned a family member, not a child though. We were very close until he ended up being caught in a pedo sting. Then I turned my back and didn't look back. I have a sister the age of the girl he was supposed to meet. I can't associate with scum like that. Number 12. My mother was disowned by her parents for her interracial relationship. Edit. There's been some discussion below, so I'm going to put it up here along with a little more detail. Yes, we are from the South, Arkansas. There are parts of this that are weird too. My mother initially lied to her parents and said she was dating an Arab man. This was fine, but they found out she was lying, leading to her being disowned. I guess in the early 70s Arabs were okay, but blacks were no-nos. They disowned my mom, but it was fine if we came over. My older sister was close with them, but me and my younger sister always felt weird going over there. They adored my older sister though, and she stayed over and went on vacation with them, among other things. I remember asking my grandfather why he didn't like my mother when I was about 8 or 9 years old at a cousin's birthday party. He just walked away. These same people who essentially pushed her out of their lives were the same ones she took care of and comforted in their darkest times. She sort of went back to them, and they didn't push her away for what I am assuming is they knew the end was near, and they were trying to right their wrongs. I have no idea, just an assumption. She was there with them until their ends though. My mom might not be perfect, but damn, that made me look at her in a completely different light. Number 11. I disowned my father. I don't believe that it's nearly as difficult a decision as disowning a child, but it was tough. I grew up in an upper middle class, perfect nuclear family. My parents were high school sweethearts. My dad was an operator at an oil refinery. My mom was an accountant turned stay-at-home mom. I am a middle child. I have a 3-year older brother and a 3-year younger brother. When my older brother was about 10, my dad's drinking got out of hand, and he became extremely physically abusive. A few years later, my mom divorced him after 23 years of marriage because she was afraid for our lives. My dad went off the deep end, started doing drugs, stealing, etc., was involved in a few hit and runs. My older brother, who had received the brunt of the physical abuse, was manipulated into a relationship with my dad for a few years. To a lesser extent, so was I. He seemed to take an interest in us for the first time since we were little, but in hindsight, it was just more manipulation and gaslighting. Won't go into all of the details, but my brothers and I eventually got wind of just what kind of sketchy stuff he was involved in. My little brother and I, who both had aspirations to get into law enforcement, cut him out of our lives completely. My older brother took a while longer. He was a kid who always just wanted his dad to love him, and so he was wearing blinders. He did eventually see the light and cut my dad out as well. A few years ago, my dad was living with his mom. My grandma had been manipulated by him for years, and they had a symbiotic codependent relationship. She was a prescription addict, and he was an everything addict. My grandma had a reverse mortgage on her house. She was diagnosed with lung cancer and given 6 months to live and moved into a nursing home. My dad kept squatting at her house despite the bank coming to rightfully claim the home. Cops got involved and he was arrested. My grandma slipped and fell 2 days after moving to the nursing home. She developed a brain bleed and died a few days later. My dad had a seizure his first night in jail and was brought to the hospital where it was determined he had a burst brain aneurysm. The doctors theorized that the aneurysm was the result of his drug use, and when he was scuffling with the cops during the arrest, his increased blood pressure and slash or jarring caused it to burst. He's now in a nursing home and functioning at about a 6-year-old's level. He has some inkling that he's f***ed up royally, and it is all his fault, but he really doesn't understand the specifics. He can kind of communicate and hold conversations, but they're bizarre and wander all over, and a lot of very strange words make their way in. I visit him a few times per year. I only do it because the person he became with addiction is dead. I believe that karma caught up to him, and he's earned his hell. I truly would not shed a tear if he dropped dead tomorrow. He's been dead to me for a decade. I do have some compassion for a sad, confused 58-year-old man who was alone in a depressing nursing home with no visitors. He knows he has kids and a wife. He doesn't understand their divorce. And sometimes he even knows he has grandkids he has never been allowed to meet. So he doesn't understand why nobody visits him. I've started occasional visits not because I have any interest in having a relationship with him, but because, unfortunately, the doctors saved him when his aneurysm burst, and we're left with a person who was paying for crimes he doesn't know he committed in a world he doesn't understand. He sometimes cries when he asks to see pictures of that little boy, my nephew, his grandson, and I have to explain, yet again, why he isn't allowed to meet him. He asks me questions about that cop, my little brother, whose name he can't remember. He looks so proud when I tell him that his son is rising through the ranks and just became a K-9 officer. It's like a shard of the dad he was 25 years ago has surfaced, and everything in between only exists as a convoluted fever dream. It tears my heart open as a human to see his suffering, but in a really twisted, sick way gives me satisfaction, but his actions caught up to him, which makes me hate myself even more than I already did. I doubt anyone has read this. It wasn't supposed to be a novel, but that's how I disowned my dad, then kind of developed a minimal relationship with the ghost of his former humanity that now occupies his body. My heart goes out to people who have had to disown a child. I was extremely fortunate to have an incredible mom and extended family to support my brothers and me, yet I'm still damaged from my time with them. Having to choose between compassion and love for a flawed person and your own or your other loved one's physical and mental well-being rips something open inside of you and leaves you permanently scared. Number 10. Not me, but my great-grandma. This story is really sad but also interesting, so I thought I'd share it. She was a young Creole teenager. French Creole was her first language, and she was a quarter to half black like me, with tan skin and loose brown curls. She was born in Florida, but when things started getting worse for black people in Florida, her family relocated to Texas. For those who don't know, Creole people tend to play heavily into colorism. Although they are definitely mixed race, they prioritize light-skinned people. The looser your curl, the lighter your skin, the more white you look, the better. Her parents had high expectations for her to marry a wealthy, light-skinned man who would take care of her. Instead, she met my great-grandfather, a poor, dark-skinned man jumping from job to job working for farmers and trying to make a living. The two of them fell in love. They were just teenagers. Her parents threatened to disown her if she continued seeing him, and like a rebellious teenager, she refused. They wanted her to do better. She wanted to be in love. They might have broken up eventually if she didn't get pregnant, but she did, and that was the end of it. Her parents basically said, "You've ruined your life," and disowned her right there. The whole family disowned her. No one would speak to her. Aunts, uncles, cousins, not a single person stood up for her, so she had no choice. The two of them moved to California, so he could get a job picking oranges. He built a house. They had their first daughter. She was 16. She never saw her family again. Number 9. My parents didn't disown me. I was just a weird mistake. My mother never wanted a child. She bailed after a few months. My father was a single parent and ended up in prison, life without parole. When I was 14, I finally met my mother. She was a police detective by the time I moved in with her. She threw me out after 2 months. I am 30 now, and life is typically a little weird around the holidays. But I always get a good laugh when I tell people that my father is in prison for life and my mother is a cop. But then they get super awkward when I tell them that no, it's not a joke. It took a long time for me to come to terms with it, but I know now that none of it was my fault. Number 8. I had disowned my oldest son. He molested my daughter, has been diagnosed as a sociopath, and we have restraining orders against him. It isn't fun, and I never thought I would be that parent. Number 7. A little different. I was disowned, but I deserved it. I was an addict and a mess for a long time. My mom couldn't keep bailing me out of trouble and watch me self-destruct anymore. I wasn't living at home. She came to see me one last time to tell me she was done. Not to contact her. She would no longer have anything to do with me. She was in pieces. I can't imagine how hard it must have been for her. But it was the best thing she ever did for me. Once she cut me off, my rock bottom came hard and fast. After a little while of living on the streets and my addiction consuming me, I made my way to a detox center, got a few days clean under my belt, and never looked back. That was almost 15 years ago. After I was clean a little while, I contacted my mom, and little by little we built a relationship again, and now we're really close. I am forever grateful to my mom for letting me fall and letting me back into her life. Number 6. My ex-wife disowned my son. We both married young when I was in the military, high school sweethearts. She became pregnant 6 months into our marriage. I don't think she connected with him at all after he was born. The most she did with him was Instagram photo shoots where she painted herself as the best mommy. When he turned free, I left the military. A year after that, she ran for the hills. I remember it like it was yesterday. I sat down with her at a local restaurant to talk divorce plans. We split all of our financials and material items down the middle. We finally got to custody for my kiddo, something I dreaded to discuss because fathers never gain custody in my area. And she tells me I want absolutely no responsibility. I was taken back and I asked if she was sure. She was. That one sentence hurt me more than anything else that happened during that time. My biological father wanted nothing to do with me, and now I was seeing it happen with my own child, but with his mother. I received full custody, and she married within a year afterwards. She had another child too. Her parents try their best to be a part of his life, but she still does her best to avoid him. He's 7 now and used to it, but I know it weighs heavily on him. But it's life, I guess. Number 5. My father said my mother's issue was she had too many children, and it gave her some kind of brain fever, much like a dog that loses its mind after having too many puppies. My mother said my father felt trapped by me. He was planning to leave when it was just my 2 older brother, and then my mother got pregnant with me, and he felt obligated to stay. Now that I'm an adult with 2 kids myself, I think I realized that both of my parents are just extremely mentally ill and incapable of loving anyone, including themselves. Number 4. As Jehovah's Witnesses, my parents disowned my siblings and I several times since I was in my late teens. One of the Jehovah's rules is that you do not associate with others who know the truth, but refuse to follow it, including family and parents are encouraged to disown any children who have left the religion. The first time was when I was 19. It upset me. I was heartbroken, and eventually they changed their minds, only to do it again a couple years later, and so on until I stopped caring and no longer attempt to be a part of their lives at all. Number 3. I have been legally disowned by my father. When I was 11, my mom was diagnosed with terminal cancer. This was her second diagnosis in around 4 years. Obviously, she recovered the first time after intense surgery and a lot of chemo, and he did not want to look after her like he did before. He also had a newfound family to look after apparently, and he had no issues leaving us. When my mom passed away when I was 14, my brother, grandmother, him and I met up to discuss who I was going to live with. The plan was my brother and his family. Father was never considered, and he showed up and declared that he was in the process of going to court to legally emancipate himself from me. He went out of his way to legally declare that I was no longer his child, just so that my brother, 22-year-old with a wife and 2 young children, already struggling on 1 paycheck, couldn't seek child support. Needless to say, it stung coming only days after my mother's funeral. Number 2. My mother and her sister were both adopted into a great family. Recently, my grandfather fell ill, and we were told to prepare to say goodbye. So the family gathered. My grandmother has had a hard time with her memory since she had a brain hemorrhage, but she welcomed my aunt into her home during this tough time. Whilst my grandfather was in his final week, Wendy, aunt, took my grandmother's ad card and proceeded to spend well over $1,000 on herself and get herself a motel room. She also attempted to steal their car. When my uncles found out, she basically disappeared into the wind. After my grandfather passed and his funeral was all sorted, my grandmother went to an attorney to write Wendy out of any inheritance she would get from their estate when she passes. She didn't press any formal charges because the whole process would have been lengthy and more painful for her. She didn't need the extra stress. I'm pretty sure one of my uncles also threatened Wendy to make sure she stayed away from my grandmother from now on too. Number 1. My parents disowned my oldest sister. She always struggled growing up more than us. She became a teen mom with a bad older dude, partied a lot, etc. But my parents helped her a lot. They do okay for themselves, but had a no co-signing rule for all 6 of my siblings and I still. They co-signed for her house so she could get a head start. She didn't pay the mortgage for almost 3 years before my mom got served in front of all the other nurses at her work. My parents worked tirelessly to try to work out deals where my sister and her family kept the house and got some leniency, but to no avail because my sister never showed up for court dates. During this time, she paid $12,000 for IVF and got pregnant with her 5th kid. When my mom demanded some of the money back, she accused my dad and my brother of beating her sons. When my parents took them to Disney World, he didn't, and said she'd file a police report if he asked for money again. They kept asking, cause it wasn't true. She awkwardly joined us for Christmas and punched my brother in the face during the meal for humiliating her oldest son by asking him if he wanted to work at my brother's company for good pay. Her oldest son is in and out of jail, and my brother was trying to help him after his release, but her son said he didn't want a job and got mad. She then called the cops and told them the same brother had illegal guns in his truck, and they came on Christmas night and searched his truck. No guns found. Needless to say, she is not welcome anywhere near any of us, and my mom still cries about it, but refuses to talk to her again. And that's all the 15 best stories. If you like more of this video, please hit the thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. You can also share your own story in the comments below. See you in the next video.